It's the 30th of March 2026, and this interview is being conducted online in the UK. My name is Tola Sargent. I'm the CEO of Archives of IT, and I'm joined today by Rod Flavell, founder and chief executive of FDM Group. Now, Rod founded FDM in Brighton in 1990 and over 35 years transformed it from a small recruitment agency into a FTSE 250 company, pioneering the recruit, train, deploy model that has opened careers in technology to graduates, career returners and ex-military personnel, amongst others. He has been named Best CEO in the IT industry at the European CEO Awards and featured twice in Management Today's Agent of Change Power List for his work promoting diversity in tech. Welcome, Rod. Thank you so much for joining us today, and congratulations on over 35 years at FDM.
Tola, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. It's been a long time coming, this, hasn't it?
It has, yes, by the sounds of it. Well, thank you for joining us today. But before we get into the story of FDM and your career in the tech sector, I thought we should probably sort of go back to where it all began and talk a little bit about your early life. Now, you were born in Sedgley in the West Midlands, I believe, in the late 1950s. What do you remember about your childhood in that part of the world?
Yeah, you know, I'm a proud Black Country man. Sedgley is part of the Dudley area, and I think I said to you earlier that its claim to fame is that it invented the first steel making process. One of the children of the Earl of Dudley, a chap called Dudley, did it. And the Flavell family claim to fame is that we were part of the Baggeridge Colliery Minery coal extraction team that fueled the furnaces, I guess, at the end of the day.
Wow. Yeah, that seems a world away from what you're doing now. Actually, I was fascinated by the jobs that your grandparents held, especially your grandfather. You said he's a former pit pony boy. I mean, can you tell us a bit about them? Did they have much of an influence on you growing up?
Yeah, I mean, my great-grandfather, Grandad Bobby, was the Baggeridge Colliery gang manager, and he obviously got my granddad a job at the age of 12, managing these pit ponies that pulled the trucks from the coalface all the way to the front. Now, interestingly, he got out after a mine fall, and my granny never let him go back down the pit again. Amazingly, saved by a chap called Harry Hill, who happened to be my best mate's grandfather, who was 18 at the time, and made a human tunnel for these little kids to get at. They were trapped the other side of this rockfall. The pit itself, funnily enough, closed in the mid-60s because it just was too dangerous. It was near a limestone area, and there was just so much water flooding through it. It wasn't safe for people to go down. But I guess I owe Harry Hill and my granddad a lot for getting out in one piece.
That's amazing. And so your parents obviously came along, and your father was deputy head at Worcester Tech, your mother a secretary in the insurance industry. I mean, what do you remember of your childhood? Did you have much exposure to IT and computing in those early days at all?
Well, I can tell you what I did have exposure to is I was a desperate wannabe footballer. I can frankly say from the age of probably 7 to 18, going to school or college was a chore, and I wanted really to be out there playing my first love, football. Unfortunately, I loved it more than it loved me. I think I definitely
it's usually the way, unfortunately, isn't it?
I thought I was better than I was. I think that's the reality. And like all of these things, I was doing a variety of jobs just to kind of fund my way through playing non-league soccer at the time. And it was my dad who'd broken away from the engineering industry, put himself through teacher training, who pointed out to me that whilst it looked all fun running around the West Midlands on forklift trucks at the age of 17, you need to think about what your job prospects might be like when it's freezing cold and you had 10 years onto your age. So
yeah.
he was the guy that actually persuaded me to go to university. So I hadn't been the greatest of students at school, but I went and did some A levels at night school, which I funded myself through, and got the grades, got accepted at Sussex University. They were doing a very, very new thing called human movement, human biology, which was a sort of forerunner of sports science. And, that sort of gave me the chance to continue playing football, but also actually get into something that I really found really quite fascinating. And I guess it was at Chelsea College in Eastbourne. That's where I started to come into contact with mathematical analysis. I wouldn't like to say the rest is history, but that's where I started to see technology for the first time aligned to sport, and that was 1979, I think. And then for my dissertation, I did one of the first studies of the effect of weightlifting on women. So that's it. That's my academic career in short order.
It's not the most obvious route into tech from a degree like that. I mean, do you think, looking back, that sort of studying people and biology rather than computing shaped the way you went on to sort of develop FDM and other initiatives following your career?
Sort of, but not quite in the way that you might think. I would actually say, as my work experience developed, there was no two ways about it. The psychology work that we'd done and quite advanced stuff back in those days, I started to realize how important it was in the commercial world. So in many respects, a lot of the studies from ISENC and others that we were studying at uni, and you've got to remember, going into the 1980s, it's not like now where you had instant fingertip reference material, but there was a lot of training techniques that were starting to utilize a lot of these ideas that were coming from America, which we'd seen at uni. So bizarrely, and by accident, I guess, I found myself through, and this is the key thing that university still does for you, and it certainly did for me. It gave me a social circle. It introduced me to people who had gone to work for Haymarket on a journal called Computing. It was originally, that business was owned by Michael Heseltine and his family. He sold that business to VNU, and I sort of arrived just on the cusp of that business being transferred from his ownership to the Dutch firm. And that was how, in '82, I entered the IT world, and it was brand new. It really was very, very different. And in many respects, a lot of the folks that you've interviewed for this particular channel, a lot of them were the figures that appeared in Computing magazine, which was really quite interesting. And you had sort of, with its rivalry with Computer Weekly, the early exposure of the Horizon Post Office IT scandal. So, to be a part of the news gathering of what was going on in technology and being involved in the sales side of that really was the grounding that kicked my career off.
Were there any sort of specific things that you sort of came across or learned during that period that really helped with the formation of FDM later on?
Honestly, Michael Heseltine, whoever went there, and so many people in the consulting industry, probably to this day, owe him a debt of gratitude, because he'd gone to see IBM back in the 70s, and he realized that training people, and this, and I owe everything to Michael for this, training people and taking a chance on people who don't know everything now, but with good structured training processes, that you can take them on any journey they want to go, as long as they've got the enthusiasm, energy, and aptitude, probably a bit of fortitude as well, to actually get through this stuff. And the Haymarket / VNU training program that I went on was phenomenal, and it really was a testimony to those training programs that IBM created back in the 50s and the 60s, and Michael brought over to the UK. I'm sure there were other people who saw the value of this, but I owe Michael that, and his organisation, and also the many friends that I made there, people who came from different socio-economic and academic backgrounds. He was very agnostic as to who came in. There was almost a very non-elitist perspective on the way that business ran. A very commercial business, I have to say, very competitive, and you really needed to be on your A game to stay in the firm. Very different times, of course, the early 80s, but nevertheless, that was the grounding that I received, and there's no two ways about it. I took so much of that into FDM in later years.
So you co-founded FDM in Brighton in 1990, is that right? It's originally Flavell Devitt, as an IT recruitment agency. Have I pronounced that correctly, Rod?
Flavell Devitt International,
Devitt,
yes.
That sounds better,
So yes, it was the archetypal attic startup. I've always said that. I boarded the attic out myself. I wired it electrically, put the 3-pin power sockets in, and for the 360 PC computer that we had that drove our initial forays, into life as an independent business. We didn't have any windows in that room, and 3 of us survived in this space for 3 years. Yeah, it was. It was. Shall we say it was cathartic?
A learning experience. I mean, maybe go back a step before that. What was it that sort of made you decide it was the time to start your own business? Had you always wanted to be your own boss and start your own business, or was it something that sort of came across you gradually?
I'm definitely in the gradual emerging person. I absolutely didn't and would never claim to have had some flash of lightning one night. No, it sort of was one of those things that grew. When you're in, and I don't know about the sorts of people that you will interview on this channel because they come from different backgrounds, but the reality is I'd met so many really, really interesting people along the way that had taught me a great deal. The Martin Durham and Richard Ward, who were at the publishing companies that I worked for, really got my mind geared towards business, and I learned so much from them. But then it was my time working for a small southern-based IT consultancy, Eurolink, where I came in contact with banking, finance, technology, and also the first flight simulators that were responsible for training pilots on A320 Airbuses when they were originally launched in the late 1980s. I worked on a program upstate New York, putting a team of engineers together to deliver that technology, and that sort of gave me this background in understanding the IBM platform. I also understood then a completely different platform that was responsible for producing skills for pilots. It was the two things together, that simulation and pilot training, and seeing that industry in action, and the financial service industry and how technology was working in that. I think that those two things had always been niggling away in the back, and I thought, I'd quite like to find my way into something else. And when we had that eureka moment of saying, well, why don't we give it a go? And we got some money from the family. I remortgaged my house at that time, and we started FDI with £60,000 worth of share capital, which we promptly lost in the first 12 months.
And that was a brave decision at the time. And was there anything that pushed you to it? I know some people they've been made redundant, or they've had something else fall through and therefore ended up making the jump. But it sounds like you chose to do that almost not quite on a whim. Obviously, you thought it through, but you weren't driven to do it by some event or other.
I think people who know me sort of, that one trait I have is I order all of my clothes by colour. I'm also a completer finisher. Yeah. And I felt that my time at Eurolink had definitely run its course and I needed a new pathway. Mm-hmm. And I felt in consultation with the two other folks that we went into this venture with, that we could survive. We didn't really have any other aspiration other than to survive and work for ourselves and build an income up that would fundamentally produce dividends for ourselves. And I think in a very, very small way, pay the mortgage. I've been asked this many, many occasions. I don't think we ever had some grand vision. What we wanted to do was just do what we'd done very well, which was make relationships, get the confidence of the client to give us the opportunity to do business and go from there. But I think the background that I'd gone through had made me really quite inquisitive about how technology was evolving and changing. And I could see, and the early 90s, in fact, today in the early 90s, there are many similarities between the two periods. There was this sudden burst of activity around small relational database technology and technology providers, and the advent of this very democratic piece of hardware called the Unix machine, which started to proliferate small to medium-sized enterprises. And then the big guns got hold of it because clearly the cost of IBM mainframe and in those days ICL and Fujitsu technology was really very expensive. So the market was seeking a different solution to crack a problem. It was looking to bring the total cost of ownership of technology down. And naturally, as the really smart folks started to get involved in making programming languages, databases, operating systems more compact, more robust, you suddenly found yourself part of just a very, very quick J curve in the marketplace. And it was just such an exciting time. Every year felt different. It felt so different. By the time we got to 1995, there was probably only Oracle left standing as an independent label from the Infomixes, Sybases, Ingress, who were all independent businesses. And if I look for some guidance as to today's marketplace, when I look at all of those language models competing for the same space, I suspect the fate for 90% of those is going to be similar to Oracle's competitors.
Yeah. So you mentioned 1995. I believe that's the year you acquired a business, Mountfield Software. Can you talk us a bit through that? What led to that decision and how it led to FDM evolving after that?
Yeah, I'd met John in 1993, and it was that flight simulation background experience that I'd had just enabled he and I to hit it off. He'd been Freddie Laker's original pilot training captain when Fred brought low-cost air travel into the UK and the US. And John had worked for Laker Airways. Laker very catastrophically collapsed. And John, who'd been a hobbyist IT guy, had found one of these first relational database systems, the Infomix system, in Texas when he was on a business trip over there for Laker. And he started dabbling with that through the 80s and had built a small little IT consulting shop doing this. Ironically, his main client was a competitor to Stanley Gibbons, the Stamp album people, Ben and May Buckingham. folks used to think that Benham Buckingham was this massive company because every single person that came out of Mountfield Software seemed to work for Benham Buckingham. In actual fact, it was a small stamp album shop in St Leonard's in Sussex. But, I met John and I'd borrowed a couple of his consultants for a client of mine in Manchester. And we just hit it off. Probably a love of aviation and all the rest of it. The next thing I know is I've arranged to sell one of his software products, not something that I'd done before, but we managed to get pretty much every council in the UK to adopt this platform. I sold it to the OEM themselves in California on a trip out there because it was a brilliant code generator in its own right and was very, very much ahead of its time in terms of the way it was structured and worked. And then, of course, the big guns saw that as well. And in this case, the big guns were IBM, who swept the company up and immediately put the channel partners out of work. So, we had to find another partner for the second half of the 90s. And it was really that and Sheila Flavell, current president of Tech UK, who helped us get the second training license from Sun Microsystems for Java. And the rest, as they say, is history.
So you went on to develop the recruit, train, deploy model with FDM. Is that right? Was that part of that or related to that acquisition, or was it just a coincidence?
I think what we've got to say about recruit, train, and deploy. Not that I want to upset any of the people who listen to this, but it's the worst thing I've ever come out with, because recruit, train, deploy sounds very recruitment industry. And it was in response to British public market analysts who couldn't position FDM against consulting companies or recruitment businesses. And I just happened to say, well, look, I don't know what the problem is here. We recruit people, we train people on our balance sheet, and then we deploy them as part of teams. And somebody, I think, had scribbled down RTD on a piece of paper. And unfortunately, the whole sort of genre, drew that moniker. And, if you actually think about, recruitment is an important facet in anything that you do, but training people from scratch in full stack development is not something to be trivialized. It's actually quite complicated and does take a period of time. And not everybody that comes into the business has the ability to absorb the amount of information that we would expect in the period of time that we allot to actually do it. And at the end of the day, the model now is so different from those 90s days where we're training with people in squads in an agile methodology, the flexibility of the program now to blend in legacy as well as the new prompt engineering techniques for agentic that you need to have. The backbone of the education part of FDM is critical. And the good thing is that the academy, which we evolved to Skills Lab today, as a baseline of extremely good mentors and coaches and folks coming off assignment to help people who are just coming into the industry and the business for the first time achieve the goals that they would like.
How do you it's probably a very complicated question that you can't answer, or either that or very simple, but what do you look for in those recruits to know that they will be able to stay the course and pick up the training and be a success for FDM and themselves going forwards in the sector?
I mean, I have to be honest with you, it has of course changed and has become just more and more scientific over the last 35 years. But originally, we were a very, very democratic business, and we just wanted folks that were passionate about writing code. And we found these folks in Sainsbury's stacking shelves, people who were using a Sinclair ZX Spectrum to produce, rudimentary work for the very, very first time, and if I look at the way John used to evaluate these folks, his great mantra was, give me somebody that can play two musical instruments and I will show you a genius coder. Now, quite how we went from that and ended up sending everybody to university to do computer science, where they only get one semester to write maybe a couple of lines of Java, but never really teach them about the scale of the systems that they will probably end up using in an enterprise environment. These are all the faults that exist in the modern academic teaching framework. But nevertheless, if we bring everything up to modern times, the root and branch of the company is to look for people from diverse backgrounds with a real passion for technology, that they can demonstrate that they're really enthusiastic first and foremost to learn, and they've got the patience to go through a process, and they're not sort of walking through the door thinking we're the finished article. Now, if we look at today's selection process, the tools like HackerRank, which is something that we use, create an incredible statistical baseline for us on a machine that produces randomized questions to actually say, across the 22 country geography that FDM brings people in for, what a good standard looks like. But he also tells us what success is like once they've gone through the course statistically as well. So in many respects, the science behind FDM Skills Lab today versus where we were, I guess we've gone from improv to the real scientific analytics now. And I guess it's the nature of evolution, I presume.
Yeah, and that's a capability now, which it wasn't back then. It'd be interesting to do a study and see how the results compare.
I still think that some of the folks I worked with back in the 90s, I regard a couple as the best developers I've ever met. And they never attended university. They both started in the gaming industry, working on very, very simple assembler chips. I mean, incredible, really.
Yeah, if you've got that passion for something, though, there's no end to what you can achieve, is there?
Exactly.
Yeah. Going back to FDM, I'm interested in the corporate history and that side of things, because I gather you had a very busy period from sort of floating on AIM in 2005 and then leading an MBO in 2009 to go private, and then back to the London Stock Exchange in 2014 at £308 million valuation. I mean, how did all of that come about? That sounds like an incredibly challenging period, but I'd love to know what led to those decisions and what it was like at the time.
I mean, like any business, the people who start the journey aren't necessarily the people who continue it all the way through. And respectfully to those folks, they felt that they'd gone as far as they wanted to go in the business, and we, the ones that wanted to stay in the business, had to find the correct solutions for John to retire and the DeVette family to move on to other investments. And that's why we did the AIM listing. That's ultimately why we worked our way through AIM for a period of time. But AIM in that period, and if you remember 2007, 2008, was just very difficult for people, not just in technology, but in the wider financial services industry. And there was a kind of a review of AIM listed entities as to whether this was the right market. And we in management, led by myself, concluded that we probably needed a period of private equity backing, and that suited all players at that moment, because they were able to get a liquidity event which moved them on in their journey, and FDM on its future journey. And that probably explains 05 to 09. 09 to 14, the thesis was to really develop FDM as an overseas proposition and to spread our wings out of the UK. We'd set up early offices in the US and Europe, and there was an opportunity to open up in Asia, and we took that. So the private equity time was actually very, very good for us to achieve multiple things without the type of scrutiny that we now experience on the public markets. And the problem and we're going through it now with FDM, because we're in a market that over the last 25 years has just been sold down, not the IT market, but just UK equities. When I listed for the first time, 40% of a pension fund in the UK would have UK companies in it. Now it's less than 2%. And that sell down is really a tough place to be for investors. The flight of capital out to America, every 7 stocks over there. You look at it from a small UK IT company perspective, it's really not been that easy. But on the other side, having been in industry now for a long time, I tend to take the view that this is a cyclicality to these events. And in many respects, just as COVID created incredible challenges for every single business around the world, each country's response to COVID was different. The issue that we had in technology across the Western Hemisphere is we overhired, and pay rates went through the roof in 2022. And certainly for the last period of years, last 4 years, it's been really, really challenging, because you've got hybrid working, you've got an older population of workers who support the IBM mainframe historical technology, not wanting to move on in their roles. The industry is in another one of those phases, but it will move on, and we will see the advent of all sorts of very exciting technologies based around agentic and quantum computing all the way through into the 2030s.
Mm-hmm. Are you happy with where you are now in terms of being a listed company, or do you ever think about going private again and getting away from some of the challenges that being listed represents?
The biggest advantage we have is that we're masters of our own destiny. We, as a management team, have 20% of the stock. We've got great shareholders that support the business. Most importantly, we've got cash. We don't have any debt. So in terms of as and when a market starts to pick up and grow, we have the capital to invest in people and future consultants. So that gives us a sense of independence that you wouldn't have if you were private equity backed and you were constantly worrying about breaching your debt covenants. So, there's never one particular right or wrong answer. I enjoyed my time in private equity ownership, but equally, I've got enough experience, nearly 20 years chief exec experience of running a technology business in a world that's been in flux and gone through many, many very, very difficult challenges. And the program that we're going through now in the wider economic space and also geopolitical, it's not desired, but we've got the disciplines and the management team that will get us through the other side.
I mean, that's one of the things that I think sets you apart from some of the other people that I've interviewed, and that you have been at FDM successfully for a very long time. Is there anything like a secret to that success, do you think, to building a business that lasts and still having the founder there after 35 odd years?
I think, I right in the early part of the interview, I said the thing, complete a finisher. You can't start thinking about an end when the business needs to focus on its opportunity. And we have a great opportunity ahead of us here. We've innovated in and around the new agentic processes. We're pretty strong in full stack and legacy, so brownfield and greenfield developments. We're starting to see where the next market evolves, where it's going to evolve from and where it's going to end up going to. And, I think we owe it to young people, especially our young people, but also military who seek a career after supporting the country, and folks who've taken a career break for family reasons. You know, having an FDM available there to get you the skills that will enable you to build your life going forward. I see that as being critical, that we stay the pace here. We've got the money to stay the pace. We can get a bit of growth going again into the business. The last 3 quarters have been a lot better than the previous 3 years. You know, we just have to be patient, and that's the point about leadership in any business setting. If you're chopping and changing everything at the front, you don't get a consistent message for all the people that are trying to support you hit your goals. So, you know, that's where we are at the moment. And as the chief exec, I've got to stay the course for the next little while.
Maybe we could go back again, because we didn't really touch very much on sort of your ex-military program, the returners program, and the diversity balance in terms of gender, which could, from day one, FDM, I gather, has always had that sort of 50-50 gender split in leadership, and a strong commitment to diversity, which was, I imagine, quite unusual back in 1990. I mean, is that something that you'd always planned to do, or where does that sort of commitment to diversity come from?
There's no two ways about it. It's my upbringing. There's the fact that I came from the West Midlands, which had and played football with people from everywhere, Sikhs, Jamaicans. It didn't matter. I was used to being in teams with people from just all over the planet. So I never really. This is the truth. I never really thought too much about it. It kind of became more of a thing when I got down south, that I could see that folks didn't all live in the same place, and there was a bit more segregation going on. So that was one part of the diversity from an ethnicity point of view that I've always felt, you know, we must ignore that. There are brilliant people from all over the place. Get them all together to collaborate. I think the second thing about balanced teams of men and women, I owe that, I think, to my father, who was very passionate in terms of what he wanted to see as an educator. The opportunity shouldn't favour anybody based on academic background, family circumstances. You know, he was very much an inclusive person. And, you know, when you're in the IT industry, back in those days, it doesn't take you long to realise that it was a very, very male-dominated practice. However, all except VNU and Haymarket. And again, you've got to look at Michael Heseltine. He was a pioneer of balancing his groups. And there were as many senior leaders who were women working for him as there were men. And, you know, I was trained by 2 managers who were both ladies. So I kind of went, well, doesn't everybody do this? Actually, when I arrived in 1990, I realised actually not everybody does do this. And I thought, well, you know, we will plough our own furrow, and I think it's a good idea. None of my colleagues in the early days of FD International and then FDM with Mountfield joining in, none of us really thought that was a bad idea, and you know, off we went. And I think if you bring it forward and then think of older workers, and my issue with the military at that time is I'd seen how well the American military was looked after by the US government with the Veterans Act and the VA Commission over there. And when you looked at what we were doing in the UK, I thought, whoa, we're not even at the races here. You know, really high talented people are just disappearing off to work for, there's nothing wrong with BT and being a telephone engineer, but if you've been a captain and run a team of people in a highly pressured situation, and bear in mind the military was using a lot of of very, very extreme technical equipment, these were really bright folks. And I thought there has to be an opportunity for FDM to offer our training programs to these folks. And I was very, very happily introduced to Colonel Stuart Sharman in the tea room of the House of Commons by a sitting MP who said, I could introduce you to lots of people in government, but you will spend a long time going nowhere. On the other hand, this is Colonel Stuart Sharman. I think he will cut through the crap very quickly, and you may well end up with a program to be proud of. And that guy was 100% right, because Stuart and I, and then a guy in the States called Brant Rousseau, we set about building a really formidable program which still runs today, that enables people from the services to join FDM, get trained, and go out on deployments and enter this fantastic industry that we're talking about today.
Yeah, use their skills in a different way. Yeah, I mean, talking of skills, digital skills gap in the UK is something that we talk about quite a lot, and it's still there. How optimistic are you that the country is taking it seriously enough, whether it is government, as you've mentioned, or education or business? This feels like there's work to do.
Yeah, I think that we don't, in our leadership of the country, it didn't matter what, blue or red, I don't think they understand it. We've sponsored the Tech UK dinner for 7 years, and I'm not sure that I've ever heard the sitting minister for our industry ever speak to their constituency, which is the UK tech industry, at any one of those dinners, because there's always been a more pressing vote in the House that has taken precedence. And yet, of course, they love to talk about the future and industry and change and how technology is going to deal with all this. And yet at the same time, you have to ask yourself, why are there so many British companies with entry-level IT programs based in India and nothing really comparable here at home? You know, they are all doing things at home, but actually, when you look at the political imperative of finding work for 800,000 graduates at the moment who are somehow going to be expected to repay student loans from what I do not know, you know, the IT industry has a duty to create as many UK-based roles as is conceivably possible. And end users of technology likewise should be doing the same, and government should be producing fair frameworks for students, whether they go to technical college or into further education and university education themselves. They should be producing a fair taxation system that enables those folks to get into the workplace and not only help develop their own skills, but contribute to the wider UK economy. And at the moment, it's not obvious to me. I keep looking, and I'm not cynical, but I do keep looking, and I'm hopeful that our current administration will listen to people, not just me, but to other folks who are probably saying similar things, but with different weightings, you know. But as somebody who has seen the graduates at close range now for 35 years and how that's evolved, where we have evolved to is not sustainable, and that needs dealing with. And the IT industry should be a big part of that journey for those folks into the future. That's my take on the whole thing.
Just one last question, if I may. It's one that we like to ask. So if you were talking to somebody who was maybe thinking of starting out in the tech sector today, or a young person considering a career as an entrepreneur, what advice would you give them today? Or maybe what piece of advice have you been given over the years that you think is worth sharing with them?
Now, look, I don't know whether this was prophetic, but I had that opportunity last week when a young lady who just graduated with a first from Southampton University in data analytics, a young lady from an Indian background who'd sent out absolute copious thousands of job applications and hadn't had a reply, somehow a relative got hold of me and just said, Rod, could you meet her and just have a chat, because she's becoming quite dispirited. Well, I find out that she flew through our hacker rank assessment test. We got her onto the program, and now she's being deployed working in a data analytics role for FDM on one of our client sites. So the advice that I'd give you to anybody that's trying to get into this, it doesn't matter how dark the day is, the light is coming at the other end. As we say, as a Wolverhampton Wanderers supporter, out of darkness cometh light. And as a Wolves supporter, we need that light right now. This young lady is on her journey. Now, we can't fulfill everybody's destiny in that way. That was just fortuitous that it worked like that. But the advice ultimately is this: you won't know how good you could be unless you take the risk. And don't give up. Don't give up on in person. You know, this whole idea that, you know, everybody lives in a social media context nowadays, and we've devolved ourselves out from the real world, I think is sad. And I think a lot of today's generation need to give themselves a break from social media and iPhones and get back out there. And maybe what they should be doing is volunteering. They should be networking. They should be doing things in schools. They should be going into the National Health Service. One thing that I didn't mention, when I was at university, something that I think probably shaped me more than I remember, is I had 3 years working in geriatric hospitals in Eastbourne. And you know what? That was cathartic, because when my parents reached that moment, I realised what we'd lost between the late 1970s, early 1980s, and where we are today in the 2000s. You know, provision of support for older people has got worse, not better. But actually, what I'm worrying about now is provision for the support of younger people has got worse, not better. And I think, in a way, you know, there's a huge question mark over not just people like me in leadership roles in companies, but to the wider political elite to actually think about all of this stuff. You know, Alzheimer's, when you didn't know what it was, and I was at university studying human biology, and you see it live and you're dealing with it as part of the job every day, and then you see it in your own parents 40 years later when they're passing through the same journey. You know, these are lessons that don't hurt anybody to go and do a stint. And our health service needs people. Our academic system needs people. You know, and there's nothing wrong with going into some careers that give you some grounding and grow you up a little bit before you go on to the love of your life, the persuasion of your life as you get older.
Get that experience and give something back in the process. So, fantastic advice, Rod. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today and sharing your story. Really appreciate you talking to us at Archives of IT.
Well, I hope it's, from my point of view, something that's a bit different from some of the other extremely august figures that your organisation has covered. I can't claim to have done anything too clever with the bits and bytes of it, but you know, I've really enjoyed my time being in the industry, and I wouldn't have missed it for anything.
Fantastic. Well, let's hope there's lots more young people out there that you've inspired to follow their passion as well and do something similar in the world. So thank you very much indeed, Rod.
Thank you, Tola. It's been a pleasure.